Hello and welcome to the Be Glad movement. My name's Pollyanna and I'm on a mission to bring you as many stories as possible of good coming out of bad and reasons to be glad. And today I am joined by Allan. And Allan is joining us all the way from Bucharest, which I'm really excited about because he's such a phenomenal character. And the reason he always sticks in my mind is the first time that I met him, he told a really well, scary and moving story, but he also had this strapline which has stuck with me for a long time, which was good morning, it's a wonderful day to be alive. And his zest for life is just unbelievable. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Allan. Allan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here with you. It's great to be with you. Yes.
Thank you for putting this time aside, because I know how busy you are. You were speaking at a business conference yesterday and you've got 2 more talks lined up while you're in Bucharest, is that right?
Yes, in Bucharest and Constanta on Sunday. And then I'm coming back here again next month and again in November for a few more business conferences that I've got lined up, yeah.
You are the ultimate jet setter, definitely.
Well, I'm trying to keep up with some other people I know. No, it's good fun. I'm very lucky. I get to travel around the world and it's fantastic. It's really good. The best part about it is meeting so many amazing people, just from different parts of the world and hearing about people's backgrounds and just, people have got amazing stories, wherever you go.
Fantastic. And you've got your own amazing story because life wasn't always like that, was it?
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't always like that. And it's been, life has changed a lot over the last 20 years, definitely. It's 30 years since I came to live in London. When I left South Africa 28 years ago now. Yeah, 1990 I left. And it's been a fascinating journey. Yeah, it's personal development has just changed my life really, and speaking has just been a fantastic blessing. Just taken me to some amazing places, and I've met some amazing people. But it wasn't always like that. You're right. I had my own journey to travel, like we all do, and I had to put some of the things in my past right and heal some of the experiences that I had. Heal my own trauma, etc. So it's been journey. Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
Awesome. Why don't you? I'm gonna stand back, because I know you tell your story beautifully on stage. I'm gonna stand back and let you take us back to the beginning of your story and tell us all about what happened.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I grew up in South Africa. As I'm sure people who are listening can obviously tell by my accent, although I do often get asked if I'm from Australia, and I always say, I know Australian and South African accents are so different. But I grew up in South Africa. I grew up in a place called Durban on the East Coast, and I had South Africa it's a beautiful country, and but I suppose growing up at that time in the late 60s and early 70s, when I was a teenager, you didn't really. Well, I certainly wasn't aware of what I was growing up within the government, in the political sort of environment, until I came to live in England. But growing up in Durban, I lived right next door to a police station for the first 6 years of my life. That was an interesting education, because I used to look over into the police yard next door and see, some terrible things, very brutal activity taking place next door. And I didn't tell anybody about that because I thought I'd get into trouble. But it was a fascinating experience and kind of like very compelling to be, when I heard what was happening next door, I was almost compelled to climb up on the wall and have a look what was going on next door. And then when I was later on as a teenager, when I was 18, I was went into the army. In between, living next door to the police station and going into the army, I was obviously at boarding school and I went to 2 private schools. I wasn't academically minded in any way. I just did enough to get through, but it was when I went to the army that I had a very interesting experience, because I was then trained in all kinds of different disciplines, and then specifically trained with a patrol mortar and an RPG-7 rocket launcher. And then the last 7 months of my 2-year period, I was then sent into Angola during the height of the civil war there, and that was taking place there. South Africa was sent there in a secret, under a covert operation, really, because we weren't allowed to be there. And we were 5,000 soldiers, and it was up against forces that were Cuban-led and Russian-funded and Russian-led with Russian artillery. And so it was a pretty hectic time, And 7 months of combat, just about every other day. And, lost a lot of friends and saw a lot of terrible things, like horrific things. And then also, obviously, had to do things that I never ever thought I would be doing. And no person should really, well, it's not in our inherent nature to take lives, to take other people's lives. But when you're in a war situation, you're doing what you're trained to do, and you're protecting your buddies. But when you come back from that, that's when you start processing what you've been through, and then that psychological impact, that emotional impact that it has, it's traumatic, depending on what you've seen and done, and it affects people in different ways, So for me, it affected me in a way where I became very depressed, and I was very anxious, and I didn't realize at the time that I had post-traumatic stress. It only came to light afterwards, once I started to study about it and started researching about it. And then I was having nightmares, and I had them for about 7 years, and it was a really tough time. And the first 6 months I got home after coming back from the military, I was out, I was finished my 2 years. It was compulsory at the time, it was conscription, so there was no choice in the matter. And then that first 6 months I got home, I was processing what I'd been through, but I was really just trying not to have nightmares every night. So I proceeded to start drinking heavily, and then I was drinking myself to sleep virtually, so I didn't have any nightmares. And that went on for about 6 months. And then about 6 months, it was July of 1988 that I was then bumped into a good friend of mine who introduced me to the subject of personal development through a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Yeah.
And he had a library of books in his flat, and proceeded to read Think and Grow Rich under his recommendation. And then I started to read all the other books that he had there. And then it was about 18 months later that I got on an aeroplane and I arrived in London. And the very first book I bought in London was Unlimited Power by Tony Robbins. And that was my first introduction to NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And I was fascinated by what I read in that book. It's still a brilliant book to this day. Even more fascinating to think that Tony wrote that book in his very early 20s. And so it's, an amazing book. And that was, as I said, my first introduction to NLP. I'd never heard of neuro-linguistic programming before. It was 1990. It was, although it had been around for a long time by that stage already, very few people had heard about it. Now most people know about it. But it was, it was a beginning of a great journey. And 1990, I've been here ever since, and I've lived in several countries. I've traveled around, done a lot of work on myself. I've been reading and studying ever since. I can't believe it's actually July. I couldn't believe it was 30 years since I read that book, for the first time, Think and Grow Rich 30 years ago. It's crazy how things have changed and where I've been and what I've done, etc., and what I've experienced. And it hasn't been all up, it hasn't been all roses. Since then, it's been up and down, as life is for everybody. We have to take the good with the bad and vice versa. But what it's done for me is it's definitely helped me to negotiate challenges in a much more effective and elegant manner, and to get the best out of whatever's happening. I've really learned how to see the best in everything, and it's become a habit for me. When I first read Think and Grow Rich in July of 1988, feeling the way I was feeling then, and I was very angry and volatile and anxious and just very uncomfortable around people. So I locked myself away. But when I first read that book, and I came across that phrase in the book, which is a famous phrase that many people will recognize if they've read it. It says, every adversity has within it the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit. And when I read that the first time, I thought, that's bull, right? I mean, I'm just fresh out of the military, fresh out of Angola, just been on this operation where I've done things, that you see in movies. And I thought, how can that be beneficial, to anybody? Where's the benefit in in that kind of experience? That's got to be. I refuse to believe that line. So what I did was I wrote the line down. I wrote that sentence down, and I contemplated that sentence for a long time. But now I can say, from what I've learned since then and the experiences I've had, I can definitely say without any doubt whatsoever, with absolute conviction, that everything does benefit us, everything. But we have to be willing to see the benefit. We have to be willing to look for it. And it's not always obvious first time out, It's not always obvious when you're looking for it initially. But you have to be willing to believe that there is a benefit of some kind. And even though that benefit may show up several years later, there's always going to be some kind of benefit to a challenge or an adversity, whatever the adversity is, no matter how traumatic it is. And that's the same for every type of adversity. So yeah, it's been a great journey, you know. And I look back now and I think, well, I'm very glad for that experience, because had that not happened, then I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now, you know. In fact, I believe that I definitely would not be doing what I'm doing now, and I wouldn't have met the people that I've met, you know, over the last 30 years. I mean, just to give you an example, I've spoken right across Russia, and what's fascinating is that 3 times on 3 separate individual circumstances, 3 separate times at 3 separate events in 3 separate cities around Russia, I met 3 men who were actually in Angola in 1987 fighting against me.
Wow.
Yeah, and so and these 3 gentlemen were in my audiences, you know, in the audience while I was speaking at these different places, and these 3 guys came up to me at these 3 separate events and said, "Hey, listen, I'm so glad that I'm here today because I was in Angola in '87 and I was on the opposite side, you know, and I'm so glad that you're alive. You know, I'm so glad you're still here because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to hear you." And what I said to them was able to help them to find some peace, you know, or get themselves closer to some sort of peace, you know.
Yeah.
So
it's making me goosebumpy. I can feel tingles down.
yeah,
Oh.
it's amazing. It's unbelievable. And these 3 guys, I asked them if I could take a picture with them, and they were very reluctant. One of them was an officer, a very high level officer, but what I said to them is I said, "Listen, this picture's just for me. You know what I mean? I won't put it anywhere. I won't post it anyway." So then they said, "Okay." Yeah, just fascinating to meet someone, right? Who 30 years ago was on the enemy forces that I was fighting at that time, you know. And now we can hug each other, you know, and we can embrace and we can say, "Thank God that that's over," you know.
Amazing. I love it. And so from reading that friend's book, Think and Grow Rich, to flying to England, and I know you decided you wanted to be a speaker. Obviously, you've got some great food for thought to give on the stage. So it has really helped you, hasn't it? Sort of, I say helped you. You mentioned earlier about helping you with decision making and things like that, but it's also given you a great topic of conversation and to connect with people. There's certainly with the military community, of course.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. It wasn't until about 1994 that I actually thought, well, I'd like to be on stage, you know, as a facilitator or a speaker or whatever that looked like. At that time, it probably wasn't. I wasn't really thinking about becoming an international speaker. I was just thinking about. I was at the time I was going through Landmark education, and some people will be familiar with Landmark and the Landmark Forum, and the Landmark is a company that's been around for a very long time. They're international organization, and they really they run all these workshops on helping people to be effective human beings and take responsibility for their lives. But in '94, I was going through Landmark, the Landmark Forum, and the facilitator at that time, fantastic guy, David Ewer, just an amazing guy. And when he was on stage facilitating the workshop, I thought, my gosh, you know, that's what I want to do. You know, that looks so rewarding, so empowering. You know, helping people to, you know, gain new perspective and transform their perceptions about their lives, you know, and transform the way they're experiencing life, you know. And that was the first time that kind of seed planted, you know, in my mind. And I thought, wow, that would be amazing. But it wasn't until 1999 that I actually stepped onto a stage for the first time and spoke to a large audience, you know. And then it was 2000 when I gave my first paid talk, which you could call a professional. My first professional talk where I was paid for my speech. And then I thought, wow, this is awesome, you know. So now it's like, you know, 2018. And that journey has taken me to some amazing places. You know, I've met some amazing people, and it's been really awesome.
Fantastic. It is awesome. I love that story, and I love that the grit and determination, which was low when you first came out of the army. You know, it was low, and you had your time of kind of grieving, I guess, and moving through that depression. But you still managed to pick yourself up. You know, that getting into the books, learning about yourself and bringing yourself up, and now you're raising so many other people up as well, which is phenomenal. Really
Well, doing my best, doing my best to do that. But you use the word there that I think is so important. And I think I've worked with some military personnel. I've worked with police, and I recently spoke in Kiev, and they've been invited. I've been invited back there next year to do some work with the veterans there, and grieving is something that a lot of veterans they don't do. They don't allow themselves to grieve, and it's a very important process. But there's so much shame and guilt, that is associated with, veterans. They experience a lot of shame and guilt when they come back from places where they've been at war, because they've done things and they've seen things that, nobody should really ever have to do or see. And it's like you say, it's processing that emotion, and allowing yourself to go through that and grieving for yourself and grieving for those people, grieving for the soldiers that have been killed, etc. And not bottling it up or suppressing it. That's where the danger comes in, is when we suppress it, those kinds of emotions, because then they take their toll on our bodies and our minds, it's so badly.
Totally agree. I know my project is all about finding stories of good coming out of bad, and some people misconstrue that I'm trying to say everyone should be happy all the time, but it's not about that. It's about allowing yourself to be sad and to move through those emotions. You can't deny your emotions. You have to let them come through and experience them and live them, and then start understanding yourself a bit more, and then you can sort of look back and, like you say, you wrote that sentence on a piece of paper, and it took you a while to digest it, get on board with it, but in the end it did pay off for you. So Allan,
I agree with you. You can't be, nobody can be glad all the time, nobody can be happy all the time, but it is about learning to manage your emotions and feel them, allow yourself to feel them completely. A lot of the time people don't like feeling certain types of emotions, but when you resist anything, then it just persists, and it's always below the surface, and then it doesn't take much for people to just trigger, and sometimes it takes, it's that old saying, the hair that breaks the camel's back, it just takes a small little thing for people to freak out because they've been bottling stuff up for so long, and it's like a volcano. But if you allow yourself to really feel your emotions, you can really just, then it allows them to come to the surface and dissolve. And I think that's, I've met a lot of soldiers, a lot of ex-military personnel and veterans and that, and who haven't, processed that stuff, and it's still there, for them, and it's still hard for them to think about those times or to even talk about it, and their families suffer because they don't communicate effectively, etc. And I think I've been asked that question a lot. How come it hasn't affected you so badly? And I said, because I think I did so much processing, right through the 90s, and I was doing so much work on myself. I did so much work around just allowing myself to heal and grieve and just feel what I was feeling, and just allowing it to release, really. And working my way through that emotion, and so now, it's it just means that now you can be, it allows you to free yourself up to be your authentic self, really. Otherwise people they find they have to be a certain way, because they're trying to prevent people from seeing what's on the inside, or they're trying to protect people from what's inside them, right? Or even protect themselves from what's inside them, rather than just allowing themselves to work through it and let it go.
Sure. And I imagine it's a continuing process as well. Some of these things you work through the main bulk of it to live a sort of more normal life, but they'll keep coming up for you at different trigger points. Will bring these emotions back every now and again. So you have to keep practicing it, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And you keep having the same stuff comes round and round again until you get the lesson, until you're willing to be with it, It's that phrase that I said earlier, what you resist persists. If you keep resisting it, it keeps persisting. So you just got to be with it to allow it to dissolve. So, and that same stuff will show up time and time again until you're ready to have that lesson.
Right. Yeah. Allan, thank you so much for spending this time with me this morning. I really, really appreciate it. I know how busy you are, so it means a lot to me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been great chatting to you.
Thank you. I'm sure this is going to help lots of people. So I'll share the links to your pages and everything at the end as well. And yeah, I'll just finish off the video. So if you like this video, do please hit the like and subscribe button and the little bell, and you'll get a notification when a new video is uploaded. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter if you search @BeGladMovement. And if you've got a story to share, please do get in touch. It doesn't matter if it's a story that's similar to somebody else's, because I really do believe your story and your voice has the ability to help someone in their time of need. So please do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you, and I look forward to seeing you in another episode. Many thanks.